What if you could recreate an object you love from the past? How would you do it? And if you could, that begs the question, why? Well, we're going to find out from someone who knows right now. I'm Joshua Lax, fountain pen user, collector,
Bit like Ollivanders, right?
and all around fanatic. In fact, I'm so obsessed, I started a business where I get to work with other people's pens. But now I want to show you everything I love about the world of fountain pens. From the new pens, to the old pens, the nibs, the ink, the paper, and especially the people. This is Uncapped. This episode is my conversation with Syd Saperstein, who in 2013 revived the vintage pen brand Wahl Eversharp. Let me tell you a little bit about Syd. Syd began collecting fountain pens in the 1980s, and at the time he was interested in what he calls the Big Four: Sheaffer, Parker, Waterman, and of course Wahl Eversharp. And as time went on, he became more and more interested in Wahl Eversharp specifically, and so he focused his collecting, restoring, and repairing efforts on Wahl Eversharp. Now, the other thing to know about Syd is that he was a lawyer. He's a lawyer by training, and he was involved in the banking industry for a number of years. And from that, he has an interest in learning about companies that make things like fountain pens. So as he became more and more interested in fountain pens, he wanted to know more about the companies that were behind them and learn about the people who made those companies either work or not. Now, in my previous episode, I talked to you all about the new Wahl Eversharp Skyline, which is a new pen that came out just a few weeks ago. Now, I made that video because I wanted to give you context for this video. So the new Wahl Eversharp Skyline is based, as I said, on a vintage pen model, the Eversharp Skyline. And I would encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to watch that video just to get some more context about the specifics of this pen and its forebearers. Now, as I said, the new pen is based on a vintage model. And so there is a story behind how we got from a vintage pen model in the 1940s to a new iteration of it in 2025. And so let me now turn to Syd and have him tell you all about that. So, good people, without further ado, Syd Saperstein. Tell folks a little bit about the actual steps you went through to bring back the Wahl Eversharp brand. You mentioned the Big Four. Today, I think a lot of people think about the Big Three: Parker, Sheaffer, and Waterman. But you saw, obviously, the Big Four and decided you wanted to help bring that back. So just talk a little bit about that process and what went into it.
Well, a large part of my view of the history of fountain pens includes the history of the companies that made the fountain pens. Being a now ex-banker, I was always curious about how companies work. But when it came to fountain pen companies, it was news to me that was such a big business back in the middle 20th century. So as I began to zero in on the brand that I liked, I was curious to know, well, why did they stop? Why did the Wahl Eversharp brand or Eversharp brand go out of production? So digging into the history of why that happened, it was clear that in the 1950s they sold to Parker. But why? So I wanted to understand what economic factors were going on that made Parker think that it was possible to buy them, or that made Eversharp receptive to a buyout offer. And I discovered what that all was without going into great detail here, but it was basically an economic decision. When they went out of business in the 60s, as far as Parker manufacturer of the Eversharp brand was concerned, that was curious to me as well. So I dug into that a little bit and come to find out that, again, it was another economic decision. when Parker acquired Eversharp, it was looking for a way to make Parker pens under their control that were at the lower end of the price spectrum. And they didn't want to keep on making or trying to make low-priced Parker pens because that would reduce the value in the mind of consumers of Parker pens. So it was for them a great idea to use the Eversharp sub-brand as a place to make their less expensive pens and not sully the name of Parker. So I understood that okay, but then when that didn't turn out to be such a workable program because it didn't have the traction they were looking for, they simply stopped making them. But I found out that the intellectual property associated with the brand, the trademarking, the patents, and so on, were preserved by Parker and eventually wound up in the hands of a company called Astro Pen,
Hmm.
which made a lot of very inexpensive ballpoint advertising pens. Those pens continued to be made and use the name Eversharp in their, what shall I call it, records and in their legal documents. But then a gentleman in Chicago, where Astro is located and where Eversharp was located, saw the opportunity to try to bring the brand back as a retro production item. He acquired the rights to the Eversharp brand for a period of time. And there was, as people may know, a very short-lived production of Eversharp Skyline pens from 1992 to 1995.
Yeah.
It also went out of business for economic reasons. They simply made too many pens and they did not sell that many and they stopped that production. So in 2003, I thought there was an opportunity to acquire the Eversharp or Wahl Eversharp name rights. And I applied to the United States Patent and Trademark Office for the registration of the Eversharp name, only to find out all the history that I just told you.
Oh, interesting.
And when I found out history, um, it turned out that I was rejected from my application by the USPTO because still was a live registration held in Chicago, Illinois, and all I could see was it was a law firm that held it. So I gave up on the idea of trying to bring the pen back under a name that I could get and continued on with my collecting and repairing and so on. But in 2011, there was a post on the Fountain Pen Network where I was by then the moderator of the Wahl Eversharp Forum,
Hmm.
asking where did those 1990s Skyline pens come from? I answered the question the best I could. And the next thing I know, someone else chimes in and said, well, my dad made those
Hmm.
under contract from a company in Chicago, which had the name at the time of Eversharp Pen Company. And they were made under license at that time. And then they ceased making them in 1995 or 1996, again, for economic reasons that brought that production to an end. And in that conversation that ensued after we had those exchanges on the Fountain Pen Network, I made contact with the people who made the pens in the 1990s. Now realize that's 20 years later.
Yeah.
And I asked them, do you still have the ability to make the pens if we wanted to? And they said, well, yeah, but we lack the capital to go back into production and do that. So I found a way to uh, supply the missing capital to go into production. And the next thing you know, we were using the older equipment, the old injection molding machine. And the next thing you know, we were able to introduce the pens at the 2013 Los Angeles Pen Show. And they were the Skyline pen was the very first renewal of the Wahl Eversharp pen brand that we did. If you look around behind me, you're going
Yeah.
to see 130 models of pen that we made since 2012.
Wow. All Skyline, all different Skylines, or is it other Wahl Eversharp
Now,
models that
if
you
you look
revived?
over my right shoulder, your left, probably in this video, you will
Yeah.
see a display case with a red banner at the top.
Yeah.
Those are the Skyline pens we made at the time. If you look over my left shoulder, your right, you'll see a row of pens. Those are all Deco Band pens we made since 2015. And if you look above them, you'll see the signature model pens that we made starting in about 2018. And at the bottom row, at the one end, you will see the Doric pens that we made as well. So together, there were four different models made, three more than just the Skylines.
Okay. Why did you start with the Skyline out of the different models to pick?
The production capabilities of our manufacturing arm uh, had leftover capability or leftover assembly capabilities for the Skyline pen.
Hmm.
Since they had already mothballed them from the 1990s, it was the easiest thing to come back with. But more importantly, the Skyline pen was probably the most recognizable Wahl Eversharp product ever made.
Actually, I was expecting you to say, well, it was something to the effect that was the most distinctive of all the models, because it is sort of a standout when you think about how it looks, the different attributes for it, even some of the materials. Like I have a vintage Skyline, and it has, like the striated celluloid cap, right? I mean, that is something fairly distinctive in even in the world of vintage fountain pens. So, which I don't think you've gone to something like that in the history of your revival, right?
Well, in a way, yes. As a business
Yeah,
model, and in order to make a company that has the opportunity to survive, the business model has to be robust and it
yeah,
has to rely upon a product that will probably have immediate recognition and, shall I say, immediate sales success.
yeah,
So the Skyline pen, and here's one of the more, this is the most recent model of the Skyline pen that's in production, is extremely similar to the classic of, must have it here somewhere.
yeah.
Here
Actually,
it
I
is.
have one that is very sim Oh, look at that.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
and you'll note, and size-wise, actually, the modern production is a little bit larger
yeah,
than the vintage one. People were always looking for the oversized Skyline as a collectible. So when these were produced, the thinking was to the new ones was to make them a little bit bigger than the original. But the cap of the original and all of its parts and the cap of the current production and all of its parts are totally interchangeable.
interesting. I didn't even try that. Because I have some of your 2013 and onward Skylines, and then I obviously acquired the new one, and I actually haven't tried to swap anything. But is it so just in going back to the vintage, right, and the sizing? So how many different sizes were there of the Skyline when it came out? Or I guess in the life of the Skyline, how many different sizes were there?
Well, there were three. There was an oversized model. There was the standard or senior size model, and then there was a smaller or a demi-size model. Each one of those models had design characteristics that were to some degree unique to each of those models. So, for example, the modern stripe skyline in the 1940s, which
Hmm.
some refer to as the moire pattern, that was really a lower middle price point pen. It wasn't the top of the line, although it probably was the most attractive. That only came in a standard size. never in an oversized, and not in a demi, as it were. The all metal Eversharp pens were oversized. They were all gold filled. But that's another design characteristic that never found its way into the standard size or the demi. There is no all metal demi or an all metal standard or senior sized Skyline. The um, design of the pen was a large part of what made it so popular. If it's no secret to anybody that from 1941 on in the 1940s until 1946, World War II was happening. And the whole idea of being in the support the USA spirit, let alone the military themselves, were all engaged in that process. Anything that was related to military activity was a patriotic thing to support. And the military uniform had a flat pocket,
Yeah.
and a pen had to fit in the flat pocket
Yeah,
and
I'm
not
checking my
go.
pocket. I don't have a military pocket. I was curious just to see, Anyway, sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. The idea that a writing instrument, and remember, we're pre-ballpoint pens here. We're talking
Yeah.
during the early 40s, there was nothing to write permanently with but a fountain pen or a typewriter, but you couldn't carry a typewriter in your pocket. So you had the um, pen that had to fit into a flap top pocket, and that meant that it had to have what they called a military or soldier clip. That clip name is not related only to World War II time frame. It was
Hmm.
earlier on as well. And the military or soldier clip meant that the clip was very high on the cap, all the way almost to the top of the cap, so that it could sit completely down inside the pocket, and only the dome of the pen was sitting above the pocket itself. So that was one part of an interesting design characteristic that made it popular. The other one was the tapered barrel, where it came to almost a point. And if a person wanted to quickly put a pen back in a pocket, it would find the pocket with no trouble whatsoever. So that was all part of what was then a new term called industrial design.
Yeah.
And industrial designing meant that things like ergonomics and ease of use and practicality had to be blended with artistic beauty in whatever products were being made. And I don't, the telephone that we all remember seeing in old movies where there was a
Yeah.
box on the wall and a hanging handpiece that you held here and another piece you held there. So industrial design came up with a phone that had both the earpiece and the mouthpiece in the same thing that you held to your face. That was industrial design, and it applied to pens as well as other consumer goods.
And so it wasn't specifically marketed necessarily to members of the military. It just because of its design met the standards that they had to follow if you're going to carry a pen in your shirt pocket.
Yes and no. For the
Okay.
consumer, you're 100% correct. But there were military contracts let during World War II for pens that were actually issued to the military for their use. They didn't rely, as maybe in other military services, like in Great Britain, for example,
Hmm.
many officers had to go out and buy their own
Yeah.
equipment. In the United States, there was military issue. And there were large contracts let to the Eversharp and other makers in America to manufacture pens for military use.
So you can actually get, if, I mean, I don't think people would, at least people from my generation wouldn't necessarily think, oh, if you're in the military, you're going to get a fine writing instrument as a standard issue item or something that's easy to obtain through the actual service. Like you would assume it's something you have to, like you're saying in Great Britain, supply yourself if you wanted. But that's, I guess, part of what sort of makes the world of vintage pens interesting is it's something we think about as being unusual or special in another time and place was completely like part of the military's like catalog of their defense contractor purchases.
Yeah, I think that in our normal view of how consumer goods are decided upon or
Yeah,
are chosen by a company, we don't think about it. Oh, look, it's on the market. It appeals to me. I think I'd like it. Do we give adequate credit to the company that made it to say that there were people who were thinking ahead 2 and 3 years that this might be a great product for people to buy? We don't usually think that way. But every company I ever did business with, if they weren't planning ahead 2 and 3 years, they were out of business in 2 or 3 years. So it just so happens that given the history of the Eversharp company, which went through a reorganization in 1940, started in 1939, the new management that came into the company at that time said, we got to get with the times. We have to move forward and hire a real industrial designer to help us make products that are going to be forward thinking, that are going to be at the front edge of what consumers will want, let
yeah.
alone do want. And that's why they hired Henry Dreyfuss to design the Skyline pen.
So let's actually, this is a good segue, just talk a little bit about Wahl Eversharp itself. You kind of gave earlier the history of the company as it was kind of on its way out, let's say, like from the 60s on. But if you could just tell us a little bit about, it from its inception to kind of like the golden age and the design of the Skyline and its introduction.
Well, that's a very long story, but
Okay. Yeah.
I will try to edit it as best I can.
All right, please do.
In about 1913, well, let's go back before that. In 1905, a home study trained engineer by the name of John Wall um, came up with an adding machine, which could be attached to a typewriter and make it possible for a billing clerk in 1905 to not only type an invoice, but also calculate and add up all of the numbers being typed into the invoice. And it became an attachment to what was the Remington Typewriter Company.
Hmm.
From that activity, the Wall Company, as it was known, manufactured that item very successfully and was very profitable and had some excess dollars and was in heavy production in Chicago. At the same time, there was a gentleman named um, Charles Kieran, and he had improved or invented a mechanical pencil, which got the name Eversharp because you never had to sharpen the pencil.
Hmm.
And he came up with a design where the lead in the pencil was pushed forward by a piston driven by a little worm gear in the back of it.
Yeah.
His family happened to be in the coal business, and he understood how worm gears work back in the day. There was a thing that fed coal into a furnace at a standard rate of new coal being added by using a worm gear that moved the coal forward. And that concept registered with him. And he said, well, if you could do that with coal, why not use a worm gear inside of a pencil and push a piston forward slowly as you twist it so it would push out the lead? But in those days, lead was not a separate item. It was already sandwiched in wood. But to make leads that you could put in
Hmm.
yourself into a pencil that he designed, it's a clay and graphite mixture. He figured out how to do that. He set the standard size for that. And then he went to go look for how to produce the pencil. He was not a metal person. He was a design person. And he found a jeweler on the East Coast that would be willing to make fine metal cases for his pencil. very expensive, very low production, and he wanted to gear up. So he went to Chicago. He was from Bloomington, but he went to
Mm.
Chicago and he spoke with the Elgin Machine Tool Company. How can I manufacture these fast? And the answer was, we can make that for you. But if you want to see our machines in operation, go over to the Wahl Company. They use our machines all the time
Hmm.
to make their product. And he went to the Wahl Company and he saw what they were doing. And the people at the Wahl Company said, well, what are you trying to make? And he said, I'm trying to make these pencils. And they said, why do you want to go into all of the capital necessary to build what you're going to have to mass produce these pencils when we could do it for you right here?
Yeah.
And so
Interesting.
they made a deal. And the deal was that the Wahl Company would produce the pencils, and Mr. Kieran would become the sales manager of it, and he would work for them. And I'm really shortening. There were a lot of steps to
Okay.
all of this,
Yeah. I can
but
imagine.
he became the sales manager. In the day of robber baron corporations that existed in the late teens and 20s, the Wall Company saw the opportunity to really capitalize on this. And eventually, through a number of things that had happened, Mr. Curran was phased out of the company
Mm.
as an employee, and Wall ended up owning the pencil company. So if you look at the early ads in the late 19 teens, you'll see, and I have a display case here that shows it that way, that it says the Eversharp pencil. But because of a way that they acquired the going out of business company in Boston, Massachusetts, the Wall Company then expanded into fountain pens, and they called it the Wall pen.
Hmm.
But they never blended the two names until 1928. So for 9 years, it was the Eversharp pencil and the Wall pen, and they didn't bring them together. Now, a lot of people think that it was for advertising and for uh, protection of reputation. They didn't want to hurt the successful pencil company by bringing out a new thing called the Wall pen, and maybe the Wall pen wouldn't be so great. So why would they want to blend Wall and Eversharp together when Eversharp is very successful and they're making millions of pencils a year? And here comes a new product, the fountain pen, and you don't want to hurt your good, successful brand of Eversharp with a untested, untried brand called Wall Pen. So
Yeah.
you keep them separate. Well, that's what people thought. But if you look back into the real history of the disputes that it came up after Mr. Kieran was released from the company, you realize, wait a minute, Mr. Kieran may lay claim to the Eversharp naming, branding, patenting, and so on, but he can't lay claim to the Wall name. So let's keep the names separate so that they're insulated one from the other. Another sort of business insight that doesn't have anything to do with what my beautiful pen looks like. So, but that's the real world of business and manufacture. So in the 1928, as I mentioned, it was decided that, and there was a reason why all those worries went away, the Wall and Eversharp names could be elided into one commonly recognizable brand that we all know today as Wahl Eversharp. It was never a company called Wahl Eversharp at the time. It was a company called the Wahl Company. And later on, in the 1930s, it became Eversharp Inc. And uh, you'll notice on the clips of
Hmm.
fountain pens that
Yeah.
the vintage pen says Wahl Eversharp from 1929 till about 1932. And
Yeah.
then in the 1930s, it shifts to only the word Eversharp.
Yeah. And that's what I have on my Skylines here. Both the new and the old, I should say.
In the 1930s, and ever since 1928, 29, the clips were saying Wall Eversharp. But then, in order to simplify the whole branding process, it became simply Eversharp by around the time that the Doric pens went into production, which was late 1932, 1933. So the Eversharp brand was merely a brand still owned by the Wahl Company until the late 1930s, when the subsidiary, as it were, Eversharp, acquired the parent, and it became Eversharp Inc. at that time. And in the early 1940s, the time when the Skylines were coming out,
Hmm.
it was Eversharp Inc. And a lot of people may not know, Eversharp Inc. by that time had become what we would today call a conglomerate. They were making later on in the 40s razors, which used to be Schick injector razors, became Eversharp razors. They were
Interesting.
in the oil and gas equipment production industry as well.
Hmm.
The board of directors of the Eversharp company was populated by a number of people from other industrial enterprises, like all boards of directors, and many of them had interests in these other fields, and the Eversharp Inc. moved into all of them. And as a matter of fact, if you go forward into the 50s when Parker acquired Eversharp, it didn't acquire all of Eversharp, it acquired the pen business of Eversharp. It didn't acquire anything related to oil and gas. It didn't acquire anything related to shaving and razors. And there were other products under the name Eversharp as well. But in the 1950s, as I already had talked about, the Parker Pen Company made the acquisition and the Eversharp name moved forward. But the beautiful thing about the way that businesses and registrations and the government and taxes and who's paying them and everything works is that the corporation that's paying them own the names of the products that they own. And so, in the case of Eversharp or Wahl Eversharp, there is an unbroken registration history with the US government of those companies and who they belong to and who the shareholders are and were and so on from 1915
Hmm.
until today. And the pens that are made today are still legally connected in a sort of a pedigree chain all the
Hmm.
way back to 1915.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you. I know it is a somewhat winding and convoluted history at times, but I think it is important to kind of talk about the DNA, or when you're talking about the DNA, to actually introduce some of that history with it. So your pens today, right now the only one that's in production is the Skyline, right? The other three models you mentioned are sort of on hold, I guess. Is that accurate?
No, the Deco Band is still in production. It started in 2015 and has never stopped. The Signature pen stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Doric pen stopped, but it's probably on hold, but not completely stopped. And there were reasons, design reasons, and so on, and market acceptance reasons why it needed some changing, and that's in process as well. But one correction or one point that I think I need to make is
Sure.
that Syd Saperstein, I am no longer directly involved with any production of the pens. We created an entity known as Eversharp Holdings, which holds all the intellectual property to and relate the products and the registrations and the trademarks and any patenting in the name. So Eversharp Holdings holds all of those rights and licenses the use of the name to what is now the production or the producing entities that make the Eversharp products or the Wahl Eversharp products. Sales and distribution and manufacture and assembly are something that other people do today. but they can't do it unless Eversharp Holdings says they can do it. They have to be licensed, and their products have to meet the expectations of Eversharp Holdings to uphold the quality of the brand. Stop and think about it. Eversharp Holdings is basically the watchdog
Hmm.
of preserving the value of the brand Wahl Eversharp. So
Interesting.
my involvement today is really as a sort of evaluator of and approver of any new model production that is going to be made. So all of these new production Skylines had to meet rigorous quality and design and business management requirements that we knew that the brand, Wahl Eversharp, would be enhanced and in no way harmed by any new production items.
Interesting. So, I guess one question I have is, I'll back up for a second. I'm always trying to encourage people to become interested in vintage pens, right? And so I'm always trying to think of like what's the elevator pitch for a particular vintage pen or vintage pens in general. I'm not asking you to do that right now, but what I am asking is, so what is it that you think people should, or what should draw people to this pen, or what do you hope draws people to the new Skyline specifically?
Well, there are a number of improvements to the pen over time. These pens are all metal. The body of the pen is machined aluminum from solid aluminum rod billets. If I drop this pen on the ground, it
Hmm.
will not break. If I drop a vintage Skyline, especially a vintage Skyline, because of some of the brittleness that has come to the plastic and aging over the years, it's going to break. And I repair many of these pens still. As I mentioned earlier, I got into all of this because of the hobby and the repairing of the vintage pens. And I still have a fairly decent stream of vintage pen repairs that I do. And the Skyline models show up all the time for broken barrels. So I know full well what can happen when you drop a vintage Skyline. The other elements related to it are the filling system.
Mm.
The vintage Skylines are still a latex sac pen um, filling system. They can deteriorate. They can get pinched. Depending upon the age of and the who manufactured the sac in the pen, it might last for a very long time, or it might begin to deteriorate. A lot of people don't realize that the inks that are available today that are put into vintage fountain pens are not good for vintage fountain pens.
Yeah.
Uh, and I encourage everyone to ask what's the pH level, what's the alkalinity level or acidity level of the ink I'm using, and you'll find that a lot of modern inks are way over 8.0 on the pH scale, which makes them very alkaline, which will deteriorate a rubber sac much faster than anything else. So that's a quick aside.
Yeah.
But
No, that's good.
getting away from the latex sac by using a converter style filling system um, is an improvement that many pens have included over the years, but that's another element to it. But the biggest thing about the pens today are their affordability. It Back in the day when even Skyline pens were made, they were $3 and $5 in the 1940s, which equates to multiply times at least 30 or 40 to get up to today's values. And when we went into production with the early Skylines, we had to pay for the reestablishment of all the equipment that had to be
Mm.
started and to be cleaned, then we had to do the actual work of putting them together and done. The molds that we had that produced the Skyline plastic parts in the early part of our run, that mold was in Switzerland. And that's where the injection molding was happening. It was a very expensive mold. It was made in Switzerland. And it came out with everything so smooth and fine, you didn't have to do a lot of polishing. The nibs that we made in that time frame were 14 karat gold nibs, solid gold nibs. Um, but we found a way in recent times to change what was a $250 fountain pen into a $79 fountain pen. And just from fountain pen usage encouragement altogether, the barrier to get into a quality fountain pen uh, to a certain degree is broken by us finding a way to take modern mass production of these Skyline pens and be able to produce them for a retail price of $69 or $79.
So you mentioned earlier, I think there was a that the sorry, I need more coffee. You mentioned earlier that Eversharp hired a designer, and that is what led to the aesthetics of the Skyline pen. Could you talk a little bit about that and how it was developed and things of that nature?
Yes, along the lines of nothing happens independently in the whole wide world at all. Everyone is aware of other things that are going and trends and so on. The profession of industrial design really came into its own from about the 1920s to the 1950s. And along those lines, manufacturers realized that, well, just, having somebody in their own company come up with a change in the way that the thing looks
Hmm.
um, was very inefficient. And the respect that was gained by industrial design over the decade or two that it was that it was coming alive, um, companies realized there was something to that. Uh, Today, they might talk to psychologists about what's the best way to describe their product to make sure the public receives it in the most positive light. Industrial design was like that back then. And so when they went to, and Dreyfus was in New York and part of a large industrial design firm, and it was very successful already with a number of products made for the telephone company and made for the vacuum cleaner company and so on. It was a no-brainer, I think, at that point to go and find professional help in trying to design a product that was going to be both practical and beautiful, and how do you combine the two?
Mm.
And that's what happened. As an interesting byproduct, here we are talking earlier about latex sacks, and here's a pen that is so tapered that it required a specially shaped sack. A lot of people today will simply take a number 16 or 15 sack and put it in a Skyline pen because it's the only sack that'll reach all the way to the back of the barrel. And it's the only sack that would get them the maximum ink capacity that they could. But the actual sacks that are now again made just recently for the Skyline, which is a tapered sack, which
Mm.
is wider at the front and narrow at the back, fits all the way to the back of the pen. Well, that was part of the industrial design aspect that Henry Dreyfuss realized he had to tackle. And the White Rubber Company in Ravenna, Ohio, was willing to say, well, we'll make the mandrels necessary under the direction of Eversharp to make the sacks that are going to be
Mm.
needed for this pen. What other sacks in the 1940s were made? What other pens in the 1940s used that kind of sack? So the power of the design and the engineering and the supply line for the elements that go into the pen were all very well integrated by the time you get to the early 1940s. all because industrial design and the command they had over how things should be made had traction.
Yeah.
And so uh, Henry Dreyfuss is the name associated with the Skyline, but there was another one associated with Dreyfuss and an industrial designer by the name of Raymond Loewy, and he was responsible for the Symphony,
Hmm.
which was the next industrial design pen for the Eversharp company.
So is it just in terms of the aesthetic? I mean, to the extent it's significant to anybody. So is the Skyline considered like an Art Deco design, like a mid-century modern design? I mean, what is the, is there, or does it fit anything, in terms of some
It's
school
funny.
of design?
Um, School of design and the way that those words are used are um, shameful because they frankly do not recognize the real art movement that was
Hmm.
and where they fit. Um, Art Deco uses triangles, squares, rectangles, and circles, and those are the design elements. So the Dorics were Deco.
Okay.
The coronet was deco. You'll find diamonds and squares and lattice work of those elements in those deco pens. Prior to deco was a period called nouveau,
Yeah.
where everything was swirly and smoky and had
Yeah.
rounded surfaces. So in a way, the Skyline pen harks back to nouveau
Yeah.
because of its rounded features. On the other hand, Henry Dreyfuss referred to this design as clean line because he didn't like the word streamline. But
Interesting.
aerodynamics were an important part of the daily conversation in the 1930s related to and 1920s related to airplanes. And the airplane era
Yeah.
was extremely influential on all design elements that came around that time. So anything that was aerodynamic, teardrop shaped, and so on were part of the clean line or streamline design, and that's what Henry Dreyfuss was known for. The locomotive that everybody seems to know about, called the 20th Century Limited locomotive, that railroad train that
Yeah.
in real life that took people from place to place, was designed to be aerodynamic and had a sort of a little bit of a rounded bulbous front and it sort of tapered off towards the end.
Yeah.
If you take a look at the fuselage of an airplane, it's round where the engine has to be in the front, and it is tapered all the way back to allow the separation of air and then the coming back together of air at the end, streamlined.
Yeah.
And that's where the Skyline pen design came from.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, that to me, right, it kind of where we started, this kind of standout way of the appearance of it is one of like the more interesting things. And I think it's great that there was a lot of thought and work put in to be able to offer something like this, like at that price point with that type of look, 'Cause I don't know anyone else who's really putting something out there like that.
Well, I think that's an interesting observation. We who are interested in putting pens into as many hands as possible
Yeah.
so that they can enjoy the aesthetics and the feel that you only get with liquid writing in a fountain pen. Um, how do you get people to enjoy that?
Yeah.
And the answer is you remove as many barriers to them in having one as you can. And some of the barriers are simple. Make a pretty pen. The other barriers are make a pen that isn't so expensive that people can't afford to have it. There's a reason why other makers who sell pens in the $50 and $60 range are universally available.
Yeah.
And I applaud them for being able to make the joy of writing um, available to the masses, if you will. And then there's a worldwide population where affordability is way more important maybe than it is in here in the United States. So yeah, breaking down these barriers that keep people from being able to enjoy it is really the key. In the American free enterprise system, those who do that and do it well are rewarded.
Yeah.
And the rewards are many levels.
So I guess one question I think people always want to know is what comes next in your mind? I know that you're Eversharp Holdings, so you're not necessarily intricately involved in all of the work that goes into, staging or preparing the next model or the next version of the Skyline, what have you. But so where do you think you go from here, though? I guess is one question I think folks are going to want to know.
Well, the beautiful part of it in the role that we play today is that we wait for the people who see the economic and the artistic achievements that they have in mind to come and submit them to for approval.
Hmm.
So we're not directly engaged in the design and creation of the next item. We are engaged in the review and approval of the next item. And so we sort of leave it to the production side and the marketing side to decide what that is. If I had to guess what
Hmm.
would make the most sense, it would be, well, what fills in the gap between a top of the line deco band pen like this one here, for
Yeah.
example, which would be very top of the line and a relatively expensive pen, and the Skyline pen. Now, we did make these signature pens, which
Yeah.
strangely are the same size as an oversized deco band from the 1920s. It
Yeah.
doesn't look like it today because it's dwarfed by the
Yeah.
size of new oversized pens. So my guess is that a middle-sized pen, one that harks back to the flat top era,
Yeah.
um, is probably a good idea. There are brands and model names that we want to keep alive. Equipoise is a brand or a model of the Eversharp or Wahl Eversharp brand that we would like to keep, or I would like to keep alive. So
Do you have an
maybe there
example
will
of one
be
of
an
those?
Equipoise.
Do you have an Equipoise in front of you could hold up for the camera?
Um, this is an equipoised pen.
Ah, okay. Oh yeah.
It's tapered conically at the ends, and it's tapered. The barrel is tapered, and the cap is tapered. So this was sort of, if you want to think about it that way, leaning towards a skyline in its most elemental form, which was the idea was to have a pen that was not
Hmm.
just straight barrel, straight cap. But this is an equipoised pen. The shape is important to the model name of the pen. And people may not really recognize it, but those who, some may. Equipoised was a takeoff and a copycat activity that the Wahl Company engaged in trying to make a competitive model to the Schaefer balance.
Mm.
The Schaefer balance carries a lot of characteristics that you see in even the Skyline with the very pointed barrel. And that was all part of the streamlining I talked about earlier that
Yeah.
Schaefer was the first to capitalize on. And many pen companies copied Schaefer's balance. Schaefer sued many people for patent infringements.
Hmm.
They sued three companies in one, and then they turned their attention to Eversharp and said, well, now that we have three victories in our patent claims, you're next. And Eversharp came to an agreement with Schaefer that they weren't going to make what looked like the Schaefer pen, which was originally called the Equipoised, balanced, equipoised.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please.
Hmm.
So, how close do you have to get before somebody says, "Hey, you're copying my pen,"
Yeah.
let
Yeah.
alone the shape of the actual pen? And the equipoised pen had to change its shape to this from what looked like a Schaefer balance, but they were staunchly insistent, we're going to keep the name Equipoise. That's our name. You can't tell us we can't do that. And so Equipoise became the name. Equipoise was eclipsed by
Hmm.
Doric. When
Yeah.
the Doric came out with the faceted sides, and there's a debate about, ooh, in the 30s, who came out with the faceted sides first? Was it Omas or was it Eversharp? Or was it Wahl Eversharp? I know what my opinion is,
Yeah.
but that's neither here nor there. The Equipoised pen is a good name. It's a historic name to keep alive. I would like to see it if we could produce one of those. So that may be something for the future. And I think the popularization of a model, whatever it is, so that it fits into a price point that
Hmm.
is attractive. And it's always a double-edged sword in what we're
Yeah.
talking about. On the one hand, you want to make a company survive. And on the other hand, you want to make products that people want. And they go hand in hand. I was asked at one point when we first came out with the original Skyline, and they said, why do they have to cost so much? Why is it $250 for this for a pen? And my answer was, well, there were many attempts to revive pens and make pens in recent years,
Hmm.
and they don't last. And so the only way that we can make these pens and have them continue to last is to make the company last. And the company has to last by being profitable enough to pay its way and pay its people and survive.
Yeah.
And so the price point isn't just how cheap can we make it, because there's a whole overhead structure that has to be supported as well.
Yeah.
So companies like the ones that I'm associated with work all the time to try to find a way to get what they're producing produced. How many pen manufacturers today are working in a single factory, making everything and every part of every pen that you're buying today? And the answer is almost none.
I don't know
They
if they're
all rely
actually,
on subcontractors.
I don't know. I know of one, but even that would have a caveat in the sense it wouldn't be thoroughly the truth.
Well, you could name one like FC, which has plants all
Yeah.
over, and you can name another one that might be MB. And I happen to know that 70% of their nib production is not in-house.
Yeah.
So you just, companies have to survive. Those who are science fiction fans and will understand the movie Dune,
Yeah.
there's a phrase in Dune, the spice must flow.
Yeah.
It is the grease that lubricates the entire everything.
Yep.
And in business, the spice is dollars and cents, and no matter
Yeah.
the spice must flow.
Yeah. Well,
You can edit that out if you wish.
I know. Well, I'm a huge Dune fan, so glad to have the reference anytime. But no, I mean that is right. That is, particularly in pens, right? That's the tension, or one of the tensions is keeping something going, but keeping something going that's also economically viable, right? And in some ways, we're kind of fortunate to live in a period of time where the market is turned around, where there's like enough demand and thus enough producers, and then in turn enough demand to kind of keep the cycle going. I feel like when I first got into pens, which was shortly before a few years before the first Eversharp revival, it was considered sort of a dead industry that was sort of limping along with very few people who were dedicated to keeping certain things going. And now that's completely, at least in my mind, opposite. And so for fountain pen people or people interested in fountain pens, it's actually a great time to be interested in this particular industry because it has kind of, along with Wahl Eversharp being revitalized, it's revitalized itself, and so it is like fortunate that, if you had, say, a 30, 40-year passion that began with a vintage brand, that the market is actually able to support something like an endeavor to keep the brand and its heritage alive.
Well, the marketing is critical.
Yeah,
And where the marketing appears and the reviews that people do today
yeah,
instantaneously, it seems, because of how quickly you can have a review and get it up and published and so on. So we were very mindful in 2013, 2014 of how they were being received. We went
yeah,
to extra trouble to have special nib grinds that could be special ordered for people who wanted their handwriting to be
yeah,
exactly the way they wanted it. We we have to go to find a dedicated nib grinder who would make special things for us to make the Eversharp Skyline pen that much more desirable. We didn't have to.
hmm,
But in mass production world, um, I see more critical comments on the social media about I bought this reasonably priced pen, but I had to go and have it adapted and adjusted, or I don't think that it writes very well for me. Um, if it doesn't write and it doesn't write well, it's not going to sell. And
yeah,
the word will get out quickly today. So it's very important, um, including our own company, our own branding relationship. We have had licensed distributors since the day when um, left the daily production, which was in 2020, and the performance there has to live up to our standards as well. And so there have been changes over the
mm,
last 3 years that now put it into the hands of distribution chains that are, shall we say, living up to our expectations.
yeah.
All of
So
that goes into it.
yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned the modification of nibs. So, as you know, something somewhat specialize in, or at least I try. And for me, when I'm looking at a new pen, someone brings me a new pen to look at, I'm always curious about one, kind of what you're saying, which is how does, like, out of the box, how does the nib appear? How is it adjusted? And the finishing on the tipping is like a really important thing when you're talking about something. So, in testing out the pen, one, I saw that the tipping was in pretty, it was finished pretty nicely given the price point and what you might expect. And when I went to actually look at a series of them, they all looked like they were finished very well. The big thing for me, though, is then how does it modify in the sense of when you try to modify it, does it become something of a nightmare, or do you get like a really good result very quickly because the metal, the tipping, everything is what you want it to be? And so I'll say I did that test for myself on, the red Skyline here, and I will say it was, I would say, like, I have no idea where the nib comes from. I have no idea where the feed comes from. But after several weeks of using it after I ground it, I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference between this and some very high price brand. So if that
Well, I
means
have to
anything.
agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah,
I had to have this one. I say I had to have it. I modified this one
yeah,
because out of the box, it was fine, but I found that if I varied it a little bit side to side, I might
yeah,
catch a little edge. So, a number of figure eights on 4,000 through 12,000 grit polishing paper, and it's good to go. Now it's my first choice. Maybe it's because it's the newest thing and I
Yeah.
like playing with new things, but I do crossword puzzles all the time.
Yeah.
Um, and it is my go-to pen to do the crossword puzzle.
All right. I mean, I keep because my desk in my office is in sunlight. So I like that it's all metal because I don't have to worry about oxidation, discoloration from leaving something else in sunlight consistently. So it is actually something like I pick up quite frequently because it sits out right there next to where I'm working. Anyway, all right. Well, Syd Saperstein, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about all this and me forcing you to recount intricate corporate history and various disputes. But as a fellow lawyer, I can't help myself in some way about hearing about that stuff. Let me close by just once again thanking you and encouraging everyone to check out the new it's sold under the Wahl Eversharp, right? So it's a Wahl Eversharp Skyline now, even though it
Yeah.
used to be Eversharp Skyline.
Yeah, it's available online under Wahl Eversharp if anybody wants to search Wahl Eversharp. And then there are a number of recognizable dealers around the world that stock the pen as well.
Yeah.
So that was my conversation with Syd Saperstein. And I want to first thank him again for talking to me and taking the time to answer my questions, however poorly worded or meandering they might have been. But I want to speak to all of you for a second and talk to you about why I made this video and why it's as long as it is and probably could have been longer. One of my goals for this channel is to, of course, talk about the things I love about the fountain pen industry or about the world of fountain pens. I say that in the intro. But one of the things I love about the world of fountain pens is that there's these people in the world of fountain pens that have been so passionate about the world of fountain pens for so long and found such an interesting way to keep that passion going that they've amassed lots of information, they've amassed a lot of experiences, and they have a lot to tell us that is fairly interesting if we care to listen. And so one of the things I want to do on this channel is to create a sort of repository for the living history of the people that came before us in the fountain pen world. And so how does that play with Syd Saperstein and the things he talked to us about in this episode? Well, as you heard, Syd has been collecting fountain pens for a long time. And he also was very interested to a very granular detail in the history of Wahl Eversharp, the pens that they made, why they made them the way they did, the people behind them, the timelines, the interactions, the drama, all of it. And then on top of it, having amassed that entire world of knowledge, Syd then has his own experience where he goes through all the steps you would have to do in modern America to revive a brand that existed in the golden age of industrial design and American manufacturing. And so that's a story I think needs to be told, and I think that's a story that needs to be saved. And so I know this was a longer video, it went over an hour, but I want to make this channel a place where things like that can live and live forever. So if ever there's a person that wants to come and learn about Wahl Eversharp, they'll have a somewhat concise rundown of the history from its inception when Wahl and Kieran got together to make pencils to this moment where Wahl Eversharp has released a new model of the Skyline. And maybe we'll revisit this again in the future when they come out with other models, but at least I know for now I have Syd Saperstein's story to be shared with all of you. And so that's why I made a video like this, and that's why I'm going to keep making videos like this. It won't be every video. As you see, I vary up the content. But to me, it's really important that the people like Syd Saperstein, who are still with us and are still working to make the fountain pen world what it is, that their stories are told and that they're recorded for as long as we can. Thank you so much, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future.